Hello. It sounds like I'm on. Sounds like there might be someone here other than me. I'm still working on my lighting. I got to get the lighting right here. Somehow it's gotten all cold and weird. Um, that's a little bit better. All right. I do have things to say other than about production values. And I'm also here to find out what you have to say. So, hello, it's Jeremy Sherman, and we're here, and I'm wearing this hat on purpose. Um, I'll start out with this thing that I made the theme for this week. Still astonished, and an Escherism that I came up with, MC Escher. That's what I want to talk about. That relates to this. Just as a place to start. But remember what we do here. This is an hour and a half in which you get to share any thoughts, any ideas you've had during the week. We get to play with them. You get to run them through the lens of the kinds of things that you hear from me. It's just one lens, but it's a lens. Hey, Rob, good to see you here. And Jeff, yes, trying still. So we're still talking about trying and why trying would show up. Escher is a trip. Yes. And he was. So I want to get at the essence of Escher. You get at through Gödel, Escher, Bach, but I don't even think that quite gets to it. That I don't know if you know that book by Douglas Hofstadter, important book for this kind of work. But let me come at it a different way and tie it into something that I'll soon have as a minor motion picture. So I think my first enchantment came from around the Escherism was from reading Alice in Wonderland, actually listening to it. I had a wonderful recording of it that I listened to maybe 30, 40 times in my childhood. But it's that scene at the beginning after she's fallen down the well and she's in the room with the table and she wants to get the key off the table and she keeps on, she eats something off the table that makes her smaller. I'm forgetting the details, which is unfortunate. But what it is that it's a paradoxical situation that she makes a move to solve something, and then that causes the new problem, which she then goes to address, which then brings her back around. It's a full cycle. It's like a reciprocating engine, if you want to speak metaphorically. It's an alternation between two things that don't bring resolution. One brings it to the second, the first brings it to the second brings it to the first. I never want to join a club that would have me as a member. It's along these lines too. And so is my Escherism. I have wasted my whole life learning things I now already know. I'm deep into these kind of things. My dad was an inspiration for them. I've mentioned this before. He used to say things like, I haven't lived my life in vain for nothing. We're actually talking about paradoxes, but I'm trying to unpack them over time. All right, so you take this thing. I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as a member, Groucho Marx, okay? So now picture this, walk through it. He sees a club, he wants to join it, he applies for membership, they accept him. Let's see, the more a man learns, the less he realizes. He knows there's that quality to it too, though that sounds less ironic, but it's actually getting to what I'm talking about. That this work, the work that I find so awe-striking still, here's another one, just like what Rev Walton's talking about here, a fruitful exercise in futility. That's kind of the heart of it here. So notice Groucho Marx has got this fruitful exercise in futility. He applies to a club, it accepts him, he therefore rejects it and then has to apply to a different club, or might even apply to the same one if he's dumb enough to just keep on applying. No, I won't accept this. Now he applies again. One way or another, what we're talking about is a process that continues itself, that doesn't find resolution. And these were a big problem in math and logic. You all know about this one. The liar's paradox, for example, the simple statement, I am lying, which has been on logicians' minds for 2,400 years. It's a real problem for logicians, because if you unpack it as, it's true that I'm lying, then the two alternate dominance. It's true that I'm lying, which means that it's not true that I'm lying, which means that it is true that I'm lying. It's an infinite game. It's a cycle that will not stop. And this is a problem for logicians because they're trying to get things to settle out. Um, we get another one from Bertrand Russell. So I'm just still playing with the same stuff, and feel free to pop in here at any point and propose a different subject. I'm just floating stuff that's on my mind right now. Um, Bertrand Russell comes up with another one. He imagines a small town where there's one barber, and the barber only shaves those people who do not shave themselves. He doesn't shave anybody who shaves themselves. And he doesn't give haircuts or anything. That's his one job. Now, he's using this to explain the Russell paradox, which is about the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does it contain itself? He's doing that played out in the barber story. So I'm about to bridge to something that is much more grounded, relevant, and pertinent to Donald Trump, the Iran attack, what's going on, the attack on the United States, all of that. So let me just walk you through this. I'm almost there, by the way. It's a long walk, but it's not that long. So Russell says, okay, so you got this town where there's this barber, and he shaves anybody who does not shave themselves. Well, very straightforward. Does he shave himself, though? Well, if he shaves himself, then he's not allowed to shave himself because he's only allowed to shave people who do not shave themselves. So he doesn't shave himself, which means that he's obligated to shave himself because he shaves anybody who doesn't shave themselves. So it's the same oscillation. This Russell's paradox. If you, for fun, if you may not be buying many books anymore, I'm not, but there's a great one called Logic Comics, which is a graphic novel, colored graphic novel that's playing out the story between Bertrand Russell and Kurt Gödel. So Russell is going to try to come up with a whole system of math that prevents any of these, what he calls logical type errors. A logical type error like the barber's paradox, or like I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. So he and the guy named Alfred North Whitehead, they burn the midnight oil and they write a 3-volume thing called Materia Mathematica, which is an attempt to make a completely coherent logic that does not have any room for these logical type errors. This is, you could say, this is the attempt, the most ambitious attempt ever, and the most modern attempt to fulfill the dream we've had since the beginning of, I would argue, language and certainly writing, which is that there is a formula, a set of laws, a given at the beginning of the universe that yields you everything that results from it. It would be a complete mathematical system. So the way it would deal, so, okay, yes, I love those introducing philosophy. I'm going through one on Kant, but I can't digest it too well. Yes, we're actually coming around to Kant in a way. I mean, I'll help you digest Kant here a little bit, though no, I understand what you're saying here. So this one's actually graphic novel. Some of them are the introductory books that have lots of nice graphics in them, but this is actually reads like a comic book. It's called Logic Comics with an X at the end. Logic Comics. Anyway, so Russell and Whitehead write this attempt to create. They say if you started with some irrefutable axioms, could you build out everything so you know that everything is either true or false? It's complete. It covers everything, and it's consistent. And they are making an ambitious first stab at this age-old question. You could say that question has been there since the beginning of belief in God, as if God makes the announcements, and everything unfolds through God. Or you hear it in Plato, who's looking for those ideal laws. That's what and you hear it all the way through science. Philosophy is stuffed with it. And what happens is he puts out this thing, and there's great celebration. And then this Austrian mathematician, a bit of a madman, died of starvation and paranoid and delusional. I mean, mathematicians are their own breed. I dated one once, very briefly. It was, and she told me that she was the most grounded person in the math department at Berkeley. And I believe it. But anyway, so Gödel comes along and says, and shows it can't be done. And it can't be done because he was able to show that the axioms themselves, when applied to themselves, undermine them. They give you back the liar's paradoxes or the barber's paradoxes that you were trying to avoid. So you end up with these undecidables. So this is called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Okay, so now let's go back to the barber. The barber is a guy who shaves himself only if he doesn't shave himself. Now, I don't know anybody else who's made this connection. I haven't looked for it either, but I'm guessing someone has because it's so fucking obvious. The barber's paradox is actually about something equally fundamental and old, which is who governs the governor. Who governs the governor? So imagine that you got this town which has a governor, and the governor's job is only to govern those who do not govern themselves. Does the governor govern himself? Does Trump govern himself? And what would you do if you ended up with an ungovernable governor? A governor who's not governing himself. What do you do about that situation? Well, you attempt to replace him. Okay, so what do you get when you replace him? Does it solve your problem? No, it's actually hats all the way up. That's the problem. It's hats all the way up. Because you'll get the next governor who will govern, who could also not govern himself. And then the question is, who governs the governor? Another way to think about this is when I taught psych and I was trying to cultivate in students turtles all the way down, yes, and we're also talking about possibilities all the way up, which is once again why I'm saying I've wasted my whole life learning things I already know, which is an ironic statement about how that goes. How just when I discover the meaning of life, they change it is another version of this. No matter how hard I chase the truth, it will never catch me, speaks to my own desire not to be governed by this stuff, by my own reasoning, which shows up a lot. Fruitful exercise and futility. Gödel showed that you can either have completeness without consistency, or you can have consistency without completeness. You can't have both. That's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And what Terry pointed out, Terry, the love of my life, my academic colleague, the guy I was just walking with a few minutes ago, he pointed out casually one day something that I find profound and applicable to everybody. We would all prefer completeness over consistency. There's going to be a strong human tendency towards completeness. And we see this in the governors who claim to govern themselves. A guy like Trump who says, yes, I am under hyper moral vigilance, my own, right? You see how that's the claim of self-governing that you get. And you can get it from anybody. It's not about Trump. It's just about what the human mind would gravitate towards, is the sense that we have the last word solution. And so here's another one of my ironic versions of it. It's the last word paradox, which is that having words makes us crave last words that further words make impossible. So I see this kind of running to stay in place and gain insights into the running to stay in place, and also into how it's not just going around in one circle. It's that once you get a circle going, other circles can compound on top of it. So what I'm talking about is a circle it's not just a circle. It's not just a loop. It's a Mobius loop, meaning that you come halfway around and things flip over. The statement is true if it's false, and false if it's true. You're alternating. You get a switch every time around. That's why Mobius ends up being so important. So as annoying as it is that we do not get completeness, our incompleteness actually explains my existence or your existence. I am at heart, this is my sense of me biologically. I'm not talking poetically. I'm talking about what I actually think I am. I am constraints that channel energy into the prevention of the degeneration of the constraints I am. If I unpack that in the simpler terms, I am using the second law against itself. I am using the second law. I'm having some some coffee, or I had a little bit of I have a snack I've been enjoying lately from my childhood. These are ridiculous. I'm never going to order them again, but they were fun in my childhood, so I ordered some. So that's some energy. I'm degenerating that energy. I had those this morning. I degenerate that energy and I channel it into work to regenerate myself and therefore my ability to continue to degenerate energy to remake myself. I am using the second law against myself, against itself. The second law of thermodynamics is how things degenerate naturally. So when I take in food, it's not, it's, I'm degenerating it to produce energy that I then use to regenerate myself. And living beings are the only things that do that. Machines do not do that. We channel energy through them, but they're not regenerating themselves. Humans are easily stained, tabula, not quite rasas. Okay, we are indeed incomplete, and because we are incomplete, that is a paradoxical form of completion. In other words, I agree. I get that. And so, let me see. I just want to say, yes, let me mention something about the paradoxical form of completion. And I think this will make, I want to flesh it out because it's always a problem when we're using these abstract words. It's a problem that we could fall into a kind of poetic abstraction that we've seen from the occasional person through here. And I want to keep it grounded. So here's one way to think about it. I'm a being, but being is both noun and verb. It takes ongoing work to regenerate the being I am. So I am busy being, that is actively, verbally, being a being, that is the verb and noun relationship. I would argue the same thing is true about, as the first time I've said it this way, trying. But if you think of wisdom as both a thing that you can have, but also the pursuit of that thing, that's how I think of it. So the serenity prayer seeks the wisdom to know the difference. That's ambiguous. And the way I would resolve that is that the serenity prayer itself, not the God, but the serenity prayer, the desire to get to wise up, is the paradoxical form of completion that we are. Noun and verb. And this is not where people generally go with language. Language predisposes us to think in terms of anything that persists must be durable. We call it reification. That just basically means thingification. You're making a thing out of it. So I'm more likely to think of myself as a solid entity that doesn't need to do any work to keep itself going. But we are indeed incomplete. And now I like that you say easily stained tabla, not quite rasa. That's right. Okay, what would you say, bringing it back to you, Amethyst, about the not quite rasas? What do you, uh, what makes it so that we're not entirely blank slates from your perspective? Obviously, I have perspectives on this. And rasa, completely different source of rasa, is also an interesting word to me. In Sanskrit, it's cool. It gets 3 pages in the dictionary. It's essence, it's jism, it's the part of music that achieves uplift off of the notes. Rasa, the mood of music, is called a rasa in Sanskrit. I like that word so much that I gave it to my daughter as part of her middle name, Glenna Rasa. But anyway, what some people would say, hey, yeah, you're a blank slate and just decide to be this way, decide to be a good person or something, as if we're blank slates, as if we are, if not blank, at least easily reprogrammed, which is why I also like you're easily stained, because the residues are what we're dealing with. It's not, and this is another angle at the same thing I'm talking about, which is what I call robo envy. There's a part of me that wishes that everybody in the world was just a reprogrammable robot. So I could just say to them, just change your mind, just do it differently. Now that you know that it's more logical to do it this other way, why don't you do it this other way? Why would you have any trouble doing that? Or I could do the same thing with myself, which is, and people do this often. They say, yeah, I thought about it and I realized that I shouldn't be this way and therefore I'm not. very dangerous last words. Like you could just change yourself that easy? I mean, I don't buy it anyway. So anyway, let's see. What do you think of the double slit experiment that broke so much ground a couple of many years ago? I don't know how it pertains here. The double slit experiment. I know it. I would not consider myself an expert on that stuff. Um, but then again, I also hear that most people don't consider themselves experts on that stuff. That it's hard to get an intuitive sense of it. Um, I think I will, rather than coming across as a know-it-all who knows everything. I'm not sure how. Um, yeah, I don't know how it would directly pertain. So uh, we could. Here's one connection to it. Some people take it as evidence that um, observation alters what happens in physics. Um, what is observation? Well, all observation, and they don't say this is less about the double split experiment, but um, this is the Copenhagen interpretation is that observation actually changes physical stuff. And given where I do focus, I don't buy that. That would presume that something has to be observing for there to be any physics at all. Whereas I think observation comes really late, and human observation comes really late. What we're talking about is whenever you observe something, you are interacting with it, and it has an influence on it. But the idea that you actually need consciousness first, which actually gets some credence from this physicist named John Wheeler a while ago, who said that reality is actually it from bit. You start with bits of information that are interpreted through observation. He's a physicist. And then he says that that's how the world creates matter and energy is through observation. I have no use for that because I've cornered myself with a different question from uh, I mean, I've already decided that I don't get to start with an observer. An observer is never just an observer. An observer wants something. There's trying involved in observing. And so no, I'm assuming that mattering, which would relate to observing, you observe what matters to you, comes way after matter and energy and space and time. So that's one lame-o response to what you're suggesting. That is, I am saying, yeah, I don't have the sense that it's got much direct bearing um, on this. But let me make one more connection. It's called the fallacy of explosion. Oh, let's see. We got I think a constant 24-hour power of our power of perception. All humans have relates to our paradoxical status of being. That's how. Let's see. Let me see if I can read this. I think the constant 24-hour power of perception all humans have relates to our paradoxical status as a being. That's how. Okay, the connection you're making to the double slit um, uh, is still unclear to me. So I'm not sure I'll be able to follow up here. But let me see. You say the constant 24-hour power of perception all humans have. Um, Perception. I'm not sure what you're meaning by perception. I turned out to be a pain in the ass fussy about these terms because we can slide off very easily in opposite directions. One is that there's some dualistic secondary realm, and the other is that we're just machines. And so my book on the subject is called Neither Ghost Nor Machine, The Emergent Nature of Self. So I don't know exactly what you mean by perception. And you might be you might be making a connection across to Lord Berkeley's theory about reality, which is that there is no reality other than through perception. And then the question is, well, how does stuff stay around in perception when we're not perceiving it? That is, it's almost like uh, the Piaget thing about object permanence. And Berkeley's answer was that God's perceiving it all the time. He was a long time ago, and was an early influence on Kant. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this stuff. I'm trying to keep it as concrete and real and personal as possible without while staying rigorous about it. Let's see. The double slit expression shows something about perception having a proof. Yeah, I think I think I'm gonna drop it at provable power. Interpreting what exactly that power is what I'm curious about. So I'm glad you're discussing your interpretation. Let me just say this. There's a difference between, so we have this whole category of things we can talk about: observation, perception, interpretation, response to something, all of that. This is in the realm, I will unpack this for you here, to my perspective on it. Those terms are right there in the ghost versus machine mess. So, for example, if I bang my table right here, it will vibrate. Is that an interpretation? Is it responding the way that I respond when I see something like a green light or a red light or a stopped light? I would say no. There's a huge difference, and it's often overlooked, between something responding to a physical interaction with it and means to ends interpretation. I've said it many times before. I have to say it over and over. It goes without saying, but bears repeating. A stop sign doesn't cause you to stop unless you crash into it. It's not a physical, it's not the same. It's completely reliant on physical cause and effect, but rather interpretation is radically different from simple physical cause and effect. It's got to go through a sequence of nothing but physical cause and effect. Habits. I've got all sorts of habits that are maintaining my ability to perceive a red light, a stop sign, and hit on the brake pedal. Take this as an example. We can think of our eyes like photoelectric cells, but that's only when we imagine that there are these reified machines. I have to regenerate my eyes all the time. If I stopped, like if I died, how soon would my eye have decayed? Would it decay really rapidly? So when we talk about this double slit experiment, we're mixing two things. One is the power of measuring as a means to an end, which is the equivalent of me interpreting a stop sign. And the other is the physical interaction with it. And you can get yourself really confused about this stuff if you just treat it all as so perception having a provable power. What I'm saying is, you gotta get clear on what you mean by perception. Do you mean, is a photoelectric cell perceiving something? I'm talking about the kind that opens doors when you walk through or flushes toilets or those things. Are they perceiving something? Now, I know a guy, he's a Harvard geneticist, who would argue, yes, it is, that there's no difference. The only difference between the perception done by a photoelectric cell and by us is quantity. And this is actually tied to a theory that's got a lot of prominence in consciousness studies and misses the point almost entirely from my perspective. It's called integrated information theory, which simply assumes that all we are is a highly connected system of perceptual powers that are all entangled with each other. And it finds its evidence for this in how we check out and lose ourselves when we're under anesthesia. Very interesting stuff. But it doesn't come down to we are just a large number of photoelectric cells. Another way to think about it is every molecule, you could say, is responding or interpreting what other molecules are doing. To me, that's just cause and effect. But if you want, you can say, well, if you get enough cause and effect together, then poof, suddenly it's conscious, suddenly it's interpreting. And that is not the route I go. I don't think that works. I mean, it's extremely convenient. It's got a completeness about it, which brings me to actually what I wanted to make the theme today, but I'm already too far in. How are you guys doing? I hope you're doing okay. This is a weird thing to do. Me just talking at people. I have to be really, I love talking. And I have to be really careful not to wear people out because I like it. This is great. Okay, I'm glad to hear. But Jeff Jeff's got a man crush on me, and I got a man crush on Jeff. So I don't know. Could you be the rest of you might just be watching a mutual admiration society. Anyway, what I want to get to is the most interesting question that doesn't get addressed at all. It's just incredible, and I floated it yesterday on Facebook just to get um, what people say in response to it. How does change change? Let me unpack this and be clear about what I mean by it. So there, and this relates to Amethyst's point. So cause and effect at various different levels, from quantum mechanics and gravity and the four forces and all of that. It it has certain consequences in terms of change. But then you get these interesting changes in regimes where suddenly, for example, if you've got molecules, they become a medium for a different kind of change. Um, no, I actually, nebulous void, I will argue that's not true. Um, and I'll, and, oh, wait, it is true if you, yeah, no, that makes sense. I disagree with myself here. We'll get back to it. Okay, so I'm going to just stick with this for the moment. So how does change change? Now, one place we see this addressed as an interesting question is way up at the level of humans. Marshall McLuhan got into this whole topic of media ecology. So I'm going to start way up there at the level of media ecology. What he's saying when he says the medium is the message, I think that's an overstep. But what he's saying is that the medium that you're working in, whether it be words, spoken, written, any of the technology, printing, radio, TV, internet, AI, that those alter how change changes. So, for example, politically, we're still going through the upheaval of the availability of the internet, social media, all of that sort of stuff. Once you get these new mediums, you get major change in how change happens. Now, I take that work all the way down to beneath the origins of life. I'm talking about medium ecology, where I'm not talking about media, I'm talking about what the material substrate is in which change happens. And so I'd be interested in any stabs at how you think about the overarching, if you were to step back, cosmological time, biological time, sociological, human time, whatever, if you look at the great vast span, do you have any idea how change changes? I'm not talking about it getting faster or slower, though that would be part of it. I'm talking about how you'd ever get divergences. For example, let me just take some obvious examples. This thing is physically realizable. It was possible at the right after the Big Bang. It was incredibly unlikely. That is, nothing's been added to the universe since the Big Bang, is my assumption. And yet its likeliness of being there, even 100 years ago, is really low. Now, not only is it likely, but it's downright inevitable in large numbers. That is, if you look around today, it's not inevitable, but it's extremely likely that you'll find lots of Apple cell phones around the world. Okay, so apparently change does change. Likewise, I was really unlikely 10 billion years ago, the universe being 13.8 billion years old. There's nothing about my physical composition that defies what you could say are the natural habits of the universe back then. I was just really, really unlikely. And now I'm so likely that I'm likely to be here tomorrow. And I'll mention that right now. I'm going to be here tomorrow morning at 9:00, not here, but here. Okay, here we go. So we go. This is the meeting tomorrow morning at 9:00, California time, of the psychoproctology McCall, the high priest of psychoproctology, is an ironic name. Um, uh, no, we are studying how do you engage with people who there's no talking to. How do you deal with absolutists or assholes? How do you deal with Trump supporters? This has been a good couple of weeks, a good week for me, or a good couple of weeks. One of my videos, I was losing subscribers at a rate of maybe 60 a week, and then suddenly I got 500 from an article from a video I did on the subject that was always my most popular, which is how to roll trolls and stump Trumpists. And at least 4 people said they wanted to join the study group based on the advertisement at the end of that. Okay, so but here's the question I was back to. Don't change the subject, Jeremy, and don't go back to this kind of self-referential advertising for your coursework. Good God. What I was saying was how change changes is an interesting question. Anybody got any idea about how change changes, such that I would be unlikely now? I would be likely now when I was unlikely before. How are there changes in fundamental likeliness? Okay, that's a good question, I think, and I have some answers to it. But I also love to hear your versions of this. Now let me go back and see some things. Possibly irrelevant, but I admire the bravery during World War II. Escher refused to join the Dutch Chamber of Culture, which effectively banned him from exhibiting work. There are some really interesting artists around that time. One of my favorite ironists is P.G. Wodehouse. He ended up naively working for the Nazis he was a prisoner of war in Nazi camps, and he made them out in the cheerful style of of his work on Jeeves and Wooster. Whenever I want mind candy, I go to P.G. Wodehouse. I love his play with language, but he was a bad case there. Now, there's another one who's right up my alley, who I want to suggest to you as someone worth looking up. I almost had a picture of him on my wall until I found out that he was a beast to his wife. He was So here's a connection to Amethyst, and then I'm going to get to Jeff and Rob and everybody. But uh, he was to Niels Bohr what I am to Terry. He was an amanuensis. He hung out with Niels Bohr, who came up with the Copenhagen interpretation of the split of the double slit experiment, and but he was also he wrote doggerel on the side, poetry on the side. My favorite by him is right up the same line as I'd never want to join a club that would have me as a member, or any of the things I said about fruitful exercises and futility. I love this thing. He said, philosophers find their true perfection, knowing the follies of humankind by introspection. So look up what Piet Hein was doing during he's Danish, what he's doing during World War II. And he's a really interesting case of guerrilla warfare with words. He was writing these things. He called them grooks, Grook, S. And they became plastered all over town. They were too subtle and ironic for the Nazis to understand, and the Danish people understood them as a way of saying. I'm going to pull it up because it was so good what he did here. Yeah, this is how. Yeah, let me just take a look here a second. Piet Hein, scientist. Here we go. He called it a consolation group. Losing one glove is certainly painful, but nothing compared to the pain of losing one, throwing away the other, and finding the first one again. So it says taking his first weapon, the instrument with which he was most familiar, the pen, he wrote and published his first Grook. It passed the censors who did not grasp its real meaning. The Danes, however, understood its importance, and soon it was found as graffiti all around the country. The deeper meaning of the Grook was that even if you lose your freedom, losing one glove, do not lose your patriotism and self-respect by collaborating with the Nazis, throwing away the other. Because that sense of having betrayed your country will be more painful when freedom has been found again someday. So he was also an ironist and worth looking up that way. Okay, that's Amethyst's point. Now let's get to some serious science. Come on, let's deal with this stuff. How would you perceive 6 planets, uh, aligning in the evening sky shortly after sunset, following a gentle arc on your 16th birthday? I would interpret it 2 ways, and I have something new to share about solar systems from the conversation last night. I think Terry's onto something, Jesus. It's big. But I won't it's not that it's big, it's that it's really interesting, so I'll get to that in just a second. How would you interpret it? I think one way to interpret it is that this is a sign and an omen. And another way of interpreting it, or that the things are aligned, or that there is a fundamental completeness to the universe. Um, and I like that interpretation. Um, and the other one is coincidence, coinky dink. Um, and so So how would I interpret this? Well, I like the wink because I think I haven't lost you by saying coincidence. Um, the master makes use of all circumstances. My favorite version of the non-falsifiable or completeness thing that people do. So there's a bunch of different completeness things. Uh, the, everything happens for a reason is a completeness argument. Um, uh, it's all God's plan is a completeness move. Um, it's the universe trying to teach me something or show me something is a completeness move. What do I mean by completeness here? There'd be no way, they're non-falsifiable. There would be no way you could ever come up with evidence that would refute them. And while we say that in science, those kinds of theories are not really theories, anything that explains everything doesn't explain anything, is what we say in science. In our hearts, we need those completenesses. I need a way to tuck into bed something that happened to me. It's all God's plan works this way. God works in a mysterious way would be another way to cover the completeness, which is I know all about what God. I trust that it is all God's plan. I trust that I don't know God's plan. Think of how complete that is. You got your trump card, which is God. God's running the show here, and you got your wild card, which is yeah, it works in mysterious ways. So I prefer the one you get from the Tao, which is the master makes use of all circumstances. And even that's an idealization. What we mean is that someone who is pursuing wisdom tries to make use of all circumstances. That's where I go for that one. Is that there's if I need any kind of Pepto-Bismol to help me with my digestion of reality, that's a good one. I like that one. I can go with that. But another way to think about it is that I can tease about the two. Um, so I can say, in effect, Jeff, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. That's my story is stepping out and saying, it's basically your wink here. You say, um, yeah, there's no other explanation, wink. Um, Now, one way to think about this is to think through all of the implications of a theory. So what I'm saying is have your cake and eat it too, or have your icing and eat it too. Yes, that's a universe definitely celebrating your 16th birthday because you are what the universe is all about. And right on, jerk off to that. I really respect that. I really respect that. I do that stuff too. That's what we need to do. Uh, but at the same time, I wink about it. So that's so here would be another example of that. What I do in my life is my God-given calling that I made up and pulled out of my own ass. You hear how I do it both ways? Do you hear both of those in there? And one way I've been thinking about it is that irony is an expression of one's ambivalence about one's own magical or wishful thinking. So I kind of wish I lived in this universe where, God gave me this calling and I could rely on it as complete, but I don't believe that's what it is. That's what I mean when I say no matter how hard I chase the truth, it will never catch me. I'm ambivalent about the truth. I actually don't. I Some truths are delightful, some are disappointing as hell. I'd like to be able to select among them. So that's what I mean. It's this kind of stuff. Okay. Let's see now. Going to Rob, Amethyst, you don't mean our consciousness affects the outcome of the double split experiment. Many would love the egotainment that brings, myself included, but that experiment does not show that. What about the unwillingness? Okay, so I'm with Rob MZ Nip about this. And this is what I was trying to get at before, that there's a difference between the powers of, you said powers of perception, but the powers of interpretation to change what happens. There are, let me try something out with this about this one. And this actually relates to something else I would say about how to think about this stuff, where you just don't go crazy with it, where you don't just open up to infinite possibilities. So I had this philosopher friend. He's an odd bird. He's a fabulous musician. Um, he was an important early mentor to me as I was beginning to think about this stuff 30 years ago. He was further along than me. But he also had a quirky spiritual side that I never quite figured out. And we're sitting together at an Indian restaurant. He played Indian music, and I saw him the other day. He happened to be in town. Um, uh, but anyway, we're sitting in this Indian restaurant. I'm learning all this stuff from him about the rigorous philosophical approaches. Um, and then we go outside, and he says, he admits that he's really troubled about something that happened to his wife, a way in which he was accosted in New York on the other side of the country, and he attributed it to his thoughts. He was conceiving of the possibility of an open marriage or something, and he felt guilty because somehow his thoughts about promiscuity, which I'm guessing he shared, um, might have changed things on the other side of the planet. And we started to unpack it, and I said, "No, really, actually, you think thoughts have that kind of power at a distance, which is like entanglement in physics?" And he said, "Yeah, I do. And this is evidence of it." And I thought about this in strictly statistical terms. So imagine this. Imagine that you could see all of the vectors of potential causality in the room right here or in the universe. So for example, this could fall on here, and so you could have a vector of force on that, but you'd be the room would suddenly be tangled up with all of these physical vectors. I want to see if I can make that gesture. Sometimes things light up when I do that. Okay. Now, add to that. So finding the cause of anything would be really complicated in the cluster flux of causes that we already take for granted. Okay, so now what happens if you add this other cluster flux, which is overwhelming, which is all of the possible thoughts anybody has anywhere in the universe, anywhere in the world, but why not go all the way out there? Any extraterrestrial might have a thought about me that would influence what happens here. The cluster of cluster flux would be overwhelming. The last thing you would expect is that you would be able to pick out a needle in a haystack. So there's an interesting thing when people posit an additional source of possible influences on things, like that thoughts can change behavior at a distance. And they go straight from that to a conclusion that this caused that. Now, I understand the emotions around that. I understand the psychological effects that the guy was going through. But to translate that, notice the problem. If you add a bunch of possible causes, you don't get to claim that you've got better ability to figure out what causes what, because it just becomes a total clusterfuck. Okay, so I think that relates, because I think, let's go back to this idea that let's go back to Jeff Cheney. So if you think through the implications of them forming the gentle arc on your 16th birthday where you perceive, now you think about what all of that entails, then you get to see that actually it's a little humbling to actually look at what the consequences are. So I lost a good friend a few years back. I still don't think he's forgiven for me this. We were sitting drinking whiskey and talking about death because one of our friends had died. And this guy said to me, "There is no knowing what happens after death." And I said that was the light that was causing me to look funny. There's no knowing what happens after death. I said, fair enough. There's no knowing absolutely. But still, everybody has their ideas about what's more likely than what. And he said, no. whether we end up in heaven or whether we end up, uh, just in the ground, those are equally possible. I said, yeah, but imagine this. Imagine I told you that it's that I believe that after you die, you turn into a gummy worm in a convenience store in on the island of Tahiti. The consequences, the entailments, what that would mean about the universe makes it so it's very unlikely for and um and we all have those. I mean, maybe you're someone who does believe that's what happens to us. So we end up as gummy worms in it. I had just gotten back from Tahiti. A friend had invited me to sail from Tahiti to Hawaii. Wow, that was something. But anyway, so that's why that weird reference to Tahiti and convenience stores. I was in a convenience store in Tahiti. That was what happened. Anyway, the guy thought I was incredibly arrogant for thinking that I knew some possibilities were more likely than others. But this is what I'm getting at. When you're thinking about, what we'll often get is the relief of feeling like we have perceived a causal link without noticing all of the consequences of assuming that there's that kind of causal link. That's what I'm trying to get at there. Because what I'm also saying is that if you get into the excitement of thinking about the big picture and thinking about cosmic forces and the power of perception and all of this, the good news is first of all, you feel like a genius because you're dealing with the big issues. And I know that feeling and I love it. It's fun. I'm kind of had to get over it because the next step was I had to learn about all these different theories and never keep up. And someone always has another one to introduce. And at some point, what I realized is what I needed was better ways to shop carefully among interpretations. And so rather than the aha of this explains that, you get into, well, if it explains that, what else does it explain? And is that something we want that fits? This is related to an idea that is really important in my work and I think really undeveloped in most of philosophy. So I want to talk a little bit about that and feel free to come. What does available information in physical system mean regarding the specific comments? Um, let's see. It is the availability of information in physical system, not the conscious observer that changes the outcome. Um, Yeah, okay. So this also gets us into another squirrely area that I have to tap into. And by the way, I would not consider myself a reasonable candidate for a rigorous analysis of this double slit experiment. I do not find it that relevant to what I'm talking about, what my interests are. My interest is basically how interpretation emerges from physical matter, and I don't think it's happening at the quantum level. There are people who do, but I don't think so. And uh, because it's not trying, nothing's trying at that level. There's no struggle for existence at the quantum level. So I got to explain trying at the level at which it's happening, which is actually in classical physics and classical chemistry. So I don't consider myself an expert, but I still want to pick up on something. Amethyst asked, what does availability of information in a physical system mean? And she's asking regarding the specific components of the experiment. I'm asking more broadly than that. What do you mean by information? Is information in a physical system? Let's just take that part of that question. And anybody pipe in with that. Does a physical system, does this thing have information in it? So a phone, or am I conveying information to you? It's another way of getting at this question. What do we mean by information? It's been a central problem I've been poking and digging at in my recent videos because I actually think that we use. Hello? Can you still hear me? Can you still? Oh, good. Okay, sorry. Um, I think we use information in an extremely abstract way. Um, and that it's actually scientists doing the same damn thing that religious and spiritual people do, um, with soul, spirit, and all of this other stuff. So remember, I'm talking about neither ghost nor machine. So I've got to explain how change changes such that there are living beings that are trying to be here now. We're extremely likely now when we were extremely unlikely a while ago. I've got to explain it, and I don't get to two moves. One move is where I say, well, there's a ghost. There's something else that comes in from another realm that explains why I came alive. And this would be standard in religious and spiritual thought, that there's this other material stuff that's, I mean, it's not material, but it's like a non-thing that's out there in the universe called a soul, and it enters into the form of my physical matter and makes me come alive. That's ghost. That's dualism. Yeah, well, I'm going to get to exactly Seth's point here. That's exactly where I'm going. And no, I wouldn't say so. But I want to get really concrete about what I'm saying here, because I do not fucking want to get into the poetry of abstraction. I do not want to lose you that way. I want to stay grounded. So what we're talking about, everything, I want to talk about physical matter and energy and what we mean by information. And I want to disambiguate it because it's all over the map. So, okay, so you got this religious person who says, well, it's obvious. You're just matter. But what enters you is this non-thing thing I'm going to call a soul or spirit or God's energy or whatever, or vital force, or a higher power, whatever. I'm going to use these metaphors from physical chemistry, like higher power. Does it have a voltage? Is it pounds per square inch? What do we mean by higher power? So we got all this poetic talk. And so scientists say, no, none of that crap. You don't get to do that in science. We are trying in science to come up with natural explanations for all natural phenomena. We don't get to import into this world some magical unknown something that solves our problems. That won't work. We don't get to do God in this work. Feel free to believe in God on your side, at home. But no, in science, you don't get to do that. But then what do? They smuggle in this concept of information. Well, what is information? Well, where it gets a scientific traction is from the assumption that we get out of engineering, dangerous place for scientists to get fundamental ideas. Okay, so I've got a coin here, and I could flip it, and it's got two possibilities. It could land on this side or that side. Set aside the edges; you don't need to think about them. And so I throw it up in the air, and it falls on one side instead of the other. That's considered a binary bit of information. That's Claude Shannon's work at AT&T. AT&T, I think that's right. Yes. No, Bell Labs, sorry. Um, uh, so he comes up with that. That's where we get the idea of bits and bytes of information, but it doesn't deal, and he knew it didn't deal with what we mean by information. So, for example, I've got a disk here, a little hard disk. Okay. Well, it does contain 256 gigabytes of Shannonian bits. That's what it is, bits and bytes. Okay. But is it information to me? Well, depends. It could be full of just white noise, just random numbers. It could be full of junk mail that's not interesting to me. It could actually have my entire body of work on it. It could tell me yes or no it could actually contain the date on which I will die. So is everything information? Well, Shannon is arguing that if you're talking just about the statistical part of it, yes, everything is information. But that's not information about anything for anyone, given what anyone is trying to do. There's a radical difference between them. And I'm sharing the dirty laundry of science. We're slobs about this. I mean, the team I work with is really trying to call attention to this, but you can sound so damn rigorous talking about information contained within a physical process without actually figuring out this difference between interpreted information, A stop sign doesn't cause me to stop unless I crash into it. Rather, I interpret it, versus the kind of cause and effect thing where a rock sitting on a mountain on a sterile planet could fall this way or that way when the ground shakes. It falls this way. That's a binary bit of information by Shannon's standard. The problem, so you ask the question, is everything information? And my answer is the problem in science right now is we pretend that information is always, already, everywhere, nowhere, and somewhere. It's just pathetic. But it's also exactly what you'd expect from human beings. Let me give you my punchline. Anything in the universe is potential information. It all has that Shannonian quality of being able to toggle this way or that. It only becomes, yes, I think you're onto something, Seth, here, the Trinity. It's always, already, everywhere, nowhere, and somewhere. Jesus Christ, I hadn't made that connection. Thank you for that. But it's exactly what I'm pointing to is, yeah, you can do this stuff with more rigorous sounding words than soul or Holy Ghost or all of that. But you're still the human being, and your inclinations can be to use words to come up with simple solutions to things. And notice how so my punchline on it is everything's potential information. It only becomes information when it's about something for someone given their effort. And I think this is very clearly borne out. So does a physical system contain information? Yes and no, but it depends what you mean by information. And not all systems have information. So I just said the way science treats it, it's ambiguous. It's nowhere because actually, for a rock to fall this way or that, it's not a thing. It's not a containment. It's just a measurement of something that happens. To say that everything is information is a little bit like saying that roads are composed of miles, that they're constructed out of miles. Information, as Shannon sees it, is just a measurement of something. So you wouldn't say a road is made out of miles, but apparently we think it's okay to say, yeah, everything is just things are just things. And so this is kind of the check on that approach where you say, no, you wouldn't say that everything is information. Nothing's information. There's just material matter and it's just mechanics and all of that. Okay, now, we also say that information is everywhere. So my favorite example of this is there was a great book written by James Gleick, who's an important science writer, and he wrote it. It's called Information: A History, a Theory, a Flood. So in the book, he mentions information about. It shows up 7 times. The word information is everywhere, but information about only shows up 7 times. Information for someone doesn't show up at all. And by the end of the middle section, which is about the theory, information theory, basically about Shannon's theory, he is saying that information is everywhere. He's gone all the way out to John Wheeler and the idea that the universe is a giant computer crunching bits. And then he goes to the last chapter, which is about how we are experiencing a flood of information. Well, what the fuck? If everything has always already been information, how could you actually have a flood of it? What does that even mean? So that's that third approach, which is that information is only somewhere. So think of this, just to draw the parallel, God is everywhere. He permeates everything. And then he enters, and God is nowhere as well in some kind of mystical sense, but he permeates everything and he enters your physical matter to make you come alive. That's the Holy Trinity stuff, and I'm saying we're still doing a bit of that with the information theory, and we don't have to. It's much easier. What I'm suggesting is much more practical and grounded. Any physical change can become information. It only becomes information when it is interpreted by someone as about something for that someone, I would say that. So we have 2 names for the field we're talking in right now. One is information theory. That's what we get that from Shannon information theory. And the other is semiotics. And I think they're both named wrong. just like an accident of birth, a typical accident of birth. We often name fields of research um, in ways that almost start them out at least on the wrong foot, if not stillborn. It's not, there's no stuff called information. What we're talking about is interpretation. Semiotics is about how signs work. Well, signs are like information. Is this thing a stop sign? Is a sign to me. It's not a sign to anyone else. It's not intrinsically a sign. It's only a sign when it's interpreted. So if there were any term I've coined, and I've coined a lot, that I think deserves more scientific credibility, it would be hermeneutology. Hermeneutology would be the study of the emergence and nature of interpretation. And like so many fields, it has a precursor in the idealization. Hermeneutics is the study of the best interpretation, looking for the best possible interpretation. So we are always, what we interpret is depends on what we're motivated by, what we want to achieve. So notice that these fields often start with self-help almost. Like, what's the best way to interpret the Bible? That's the traditional meaning of hermeneutics. We're going to duke it out until we come to the best one. Why? Because we need the right interpretation. It's the body, it's the complete information for living right. That's what it is. It's sacred text. And I'm saying it takes a minute to step back from that and actually say, wait, what is interpretation anyway? I mean, because I was saying the table doesn't interpret when I hit it. The table doesn't, it bounces, but that's not an interpretation. Some things interpret, others don't. I would say living beings interpret. Now you get into this interesting question about whether AI interprets. Let's see, idea about the universe. Oh, that's right. Okay, sorry, not about the. Thank you for bringing me back around. I do an admirable job of keeping the split ends from going crazy. I have to commend myself for that. Um, but I get so many things going. No, I don't have to commend myself for that. I'll just be clear. I was half joking there. And it's only going to get worse with time. But here's the point. Let me go to it. So with Terry, we are doing careful speculation about how change changes at the prior to Luca, the last universal common ancestor. So let me just set this up for you a bit. We have a theory about how change changes. You could call it emergence theory, but it's got to be more than just that shit emerges. I have to know how it emerges. I have to know that in strictly physical terms. I don't get to bring in anything but the the basic, which for me would be matter in motion, the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is degenerating. And that's a real problem for natural selection as a theory of how change changes. So if we assume that evolution is just natural selection, that's a problem because actually natural selection is what I started with. Things falling apart. Natural selection is a terrible name for it because nothing's selecting anything. It's actually just the name we give to degeneration, or the second law of thermodynamics, as applied to living beings. And it's sent us on 150 or more years, no, 150 years, of misunderstanding of what goes on in biology. Because we assume, okay, well, you start with these molecules and then they replicate. This is the Richard Dawkins thing, which was a major influence on my life early on. So you got these molecules, and then some molecules are better at copying themselves than other molecules. And then give it enough time, you end up with fancy shit like us. It's been a stretch, and scientists have recognized that that's a stretch. One challenge we got from an intelligent design guy was like that's like saying that a hurricane can go into a junkyard and build a 747 out of it. Doesn't actually explain how you would generate the kinds of synergies we've got inside of us. So we have this theory. I've talked about it before. I've got a few videos about it called falling up, which is about how when things come into how I can't go into much detail about it, but because I want to get to your punchline and we don't have that much time left. The thing about the solar systems. But what it means is actually there's a second half of evolution, which is the generative complement. How would you ever get synergies like the kind that sustain us? That there'd have to be actually at the origins of life, because actually natural selection does not explain the origins of life. We know that, and yet we keep on slipping back into it. This is what I call um, uh, uh, insight overreach. Darwinian selection is a really important piece of the story, but we tend to think that it explained everything, and it doesn't. So we are trying to work out in detail how you'd get from a universe that has only peptides, which are short strings of proteins that had come from other planets, and how they would ever coalesce into what we call an autogen. And I've got some videos about that. Um, and which would be the origins of interpretation of a self trying, and then how it would develop energetic a capacity to maintain its own energy and sequence of transformations, its first Mobius loop that would maintain itself, and how it would then from there compound to where 3.8 billion years ago, 3.5, something like that, doesn't matter. We end up with this highly specified universal system that goes from DNA to messenger RNA to ribosomes and transfer RNA to proteins built from amino acids. It's a really big question, but we got a hunch about it because we have a different way of looking at it. Until now, people have basically tried to figure it out based on natural selection only, random mutation. But we have this whole other thing. Terry's writing up in a book called Falling Up. Let me give you the basics of falling up as intuitively as possible. If you find something external to you that does what you need done, for example, your phone keeps your telephone numbers, then you will stop remembering your own phone numbers and you'll become addicted to it. You know, my ancestors used to farm, then there were stores, we lost the ability to farm, now we're addicted to stores. We see that all the way down to the origins of life. It's the other side of the story, which is if two things end up being complementary to each other, then they can both relax and lose some capacity. It becomes like addiction. So we've talked about this a bit before. We probably more in the Sunday session last week. Okay, so sorry, I'm still coming to this. It turns out that solar systems, given the I'm going to do a terrible job of this because I heard it one time in passing yesterday. But solar systems, given that they will tend to be hotter towards the center and cooler further out, they generate in the hot, dry regions closer to their sun. They generate hydrogen cyanide molecules in abundance that then get sent in meteor showers. Well, hydrogen cyanide molecules have two features that make them particularly conducive to this kind of synergistic relationship, to becoming, in effect, part of the control that keeps chaos from taking systems over. So we've thought about how unique the Earth is. But Terry is actually suggesting, it's a new speculation, that there may be something about just a fortuitous, not like Jeff's sunsets experience, just a lucky happenstance that these molecules that are especially conducive, because they have two, what we call affordances, they have two potentially functional uses that are conducive to life itself. They may actually be giving a leg up. it's not about whether a planet has the capacity, but whether a solar system actually supplies this unusually common next at hotter places, common molecule that would be useful anywhere in the universe to basically memory of sequences so that you can sustain a Mobius loop, the paradox of an organism that is using the second law against each other. The details of this are there. One of the ways we talk about it is that there's so many possibilities. So you got to figure out how do RNA molecules end up with all of these complementary specialized relationships. There's tRNA, there's mRNA, there's two kinds of RNA involved in the production of a ribosome. How do you get that specialization? Well, the theory in most science would be, well, random mutation, and if it's functional. We're saying, no, we can actually trim it down. The possibilities aren't that overwhelming because actually there's this other thing, which is if you end up with a overproduction of something, then that is functional, then the pressure on any of them to function goes down, which means that they can start to mutate, and then they might find new synergies that become functional. Let me just draw that parallel over to what I'm talking about with grocery stores. So I used to have to make my own food, not really, but my ancestors did. Then we came on grocery stores, and now I'm freed up because I don't have to make my own food anymore. I'm freed up, but I have to also maintain the grocery store, which maintains me, and I'm freed up to do all of this other work. And we have a synergy. There's a butcher, baker, candlestick maker synergy of an economy is based on basically this. And sorry, I'm going to make a connection here that will tie into a popular topic. Um, why can't we all get along? Well, another question is why the hell do we get along as well as we do? Is that because we are altruistic and have decided kumbaya? My guess is no. My guess is we get along much more because we fucking depend on each other right now. We are all addicted to each other to some extent. It makes it quite irritated. In case you have ever been married, you might know that it's also can become irritating to be so addicted to each other. You've both let your independence slide and you're now in with each other. So yeah, you can see why we would be all partisan and pissed off and acting like Karens everywhere. But in the meantime, if you want to understand why it works as smoothly as it does, it's not virtue. It cost my ass if I pulled out of society. If I was not civil, I get away with a whole lot more incivility than most people. But imagine if you were uncivil in your life where you had to earn a living and all of that sort of stuff, and you depend on people around you, snap at them one time, you lose your job, you lose your food. We are addicted to each other. And this is a disappointment to a bunch of my more spiritual friends who would like to feel like they are champions of virtue by telling everybody to be more kind to each other, because it kind of takes we're kindest to people we depend upon. And they're kindest to us for the same reason. And that's a little cold hearted. It sounds like cost benefit analysis. Honey, it is. We have to function. I do not assume that um, our commitment to morality drives much with us. I don't think so. I think that words are a late overlay on things we do for other reasons. And now to blow your mind one more time before we end this thing, and this is not my idea. Oh, by the way, um, I have some friends who find me annoying because I have so much to say, but I have other friends who actually like me because they also want to go out and be able to say a bunch of stuff. And they look at me and they say, "Oh yeah, I could learn shit to say with him. His show and tell could become my show and tell." It's exactly what I did with Terry. I might say, well, I was open to learning more about the ways of the universe. I was curious and all of that. I actually find it more reliable for me to pay attention to me in meat space. And for example, the way that I will decide whether who's listening to, in part based on whether they have anything I might be able to share with others. So And I do have friends who just they don't see that in me, and it's totally fine. They don't have to. They've got something else to share or something. But also, anyway, it's one of the reasons why I like these conversations. So I think you guys are probably doing some of that with me, the way I did with Terry. And even if you don't, you show up, and I'm grateful for your company here. But anyway, let me say this thing. What Terry calls that process we just described. This is Terrence Deacon. He's a professor emeritus in biology from Berkeley. He was a Harvard neuroscientist and then moved to Berkeley, biological anthropologist, a neuroscientist, who I've had the extraordinary good fortune to work with closely for 30 years. Okay, so he calls this theory inverse Darwinism. It relates to when I was just talking about the grocery stores or addicted to something, falling up is his other name for it. It's an inverse process. It's where actually instead of paying attention to what the selective pressures are that make it so if you're going to survive, you're going to have this, the narrow gauntlet of how you could survive. It's paying attention to what happens when the selective pressure is off. When a grocery shows up, the selective pressure for me to grow food falls off. And therefore, I'm free to do other things. I could fuck around and become useless, like some inheritors do. I could find something new to do that becomes a complement, and now we're all addicted to each other. So this is falling up or inverse Darwinism, but there's more to it than that. It turns out, so when we talk about a process like DNA to proteins, we talk about it in that direction. We see it like a machine. You start out with this DNA blueprint, and then it goes through transformations through mRNA, tRNA, ribosomes, and then it produces proteins. What we've discovered by looking at it the way we do is actually the process originated the other way around. That it's actually, so what you had to have first was functional proteins. That is, you had to have a system that is maintaining itself, and it's not got all that complicated mechanism. It accumulates that back asswards. You would have had functional proteins first, then RNA, DNA as a last bastion, you offloaded onto a template at the end. So now let me just apply that to what goes on in everyday human life. I think that it generally works that way, which is um, uh, whatever the process we see going this way would likely have evolved this way. So you deal with this when you're talking to a friend and he says he's got some really strong opinions about things. And he gives you the impression that he came to those strong opinions by reason. That is, he was a neutral person who was just exploring, just wanted to figure out what was true just after the facts, came to a conviction, and then is now declaring them as his decision after a process of deciding. Power of neutral thinking. I think that's it's very rarely the case. That's again this mechanistic model that I did all this machine crunching of numbers and calculating to come to my opinion. I think actually the functional opinion came first. We say what we need to hear. So I'm playing with parallels across all of those levels. And I think that one's an interesting one. I won't get into it here, but no, God, no, I won't. Enough already. Let me see if there's any last things I want to remind you. We've got this meeting. There's going to be some new blood there anyway tomorrow morning. This is 9:00 at this address. And this is the usual suspects plus some new people. And what we deal with in this group, if you don't know, is we try to figure out how to better engage with the kind of people I was just describing. Someone who has a really strong opinion, and there's no talking to them, and we suspect that their strong opinion is primarily for the mojo or the confidence. So this is mostly about how to deal with Trumpists, but there are so many. You can do it for anything. I mean, I am grateful for the amount of exchange I get in part because it shows me how non-denominational this is. It's just a standard human thing. So how do you humbly humble or humiliate humans who will say or do anything to avoid human humility? How do you touch or poke the touchy untouchables? How do you engage with people there's just no talking to? I think it's really important work if we are going to sustain us on Earth. I would also say that what they're doing, the know-it-all absolutists who are playing God, they are doing their own version of the Mobius strip. So remember, I think that liars' paradoxes are delightful, and I never would join a club who that would have me. It's delightful, and I'm tickled by this stuff. And not only that, I'm also think that I am a Mobius strip that has accumulated a vast number of Mobius strips on it. So is Nazism. So is Trumpism. They are like that too. They have a high degree, believe it or not, of integrity. God awful. Cancer has integrity that keeps it regenerating itself. It's integrated to that extent. But just so don't get the feeling, what I want to do is the power of neutral thinking. I want to keep the difference between what I advocate and what I analyze. I'm trying to use the power of neutral thinking to analyze what goes on. I do not want my advocacy, oh, this sounds like a good thing. Emergence sounds like a good thing. And I want to be, no, emergence can be shit. So emergence or any of these positive words, consciousness, um, self-sustainability. I mean, any of those words, I want to understand them. Remember, I was using just a minute ago my addiction to grocery stores as an example of something. Is addiction a good or a bad thing? It depends what you're addicted to. Um, uh, my definition of love and my definition of addiction are exactly the same in terms of the process involved. You have fallen up into doing dedicated work to maintain something you depend upon. I am addicted or in love to some degree. It's always a question of degree to grocery stores, meaning that I have to do dedicated work to maintain my access to them because if they suddenly disappeared, then I would be at a loss. Now, the same could be, now, this bridges you right over into economics and all this stuff about elasticity of demand. Am I addicted to my local grocery store? No, there's a bunch of them around. Are you addicted to your partner? Yeah, to some extent. How much of an extent? Because at the extreme, there's you take Sally, I'll take Sue, ain't no difference twixt the two. So there's a question about what part of it you're addicted to, what part you depend upon with any of this. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. Can you imagine having to live with me? I mean, I just have so much fun, but some people just listen to me and think, this guy's manic and at least intense. Okay, many people use many words to say little. You speak volumes with few words. Thank you, darling. Um, uh, the insight I gain here is so dense, it will take a while to sink in. I love dialogue, but this format isn't conducive. Let me then say one more thing about that, my friend, which is because this isn't conducive, every other Sunday, not tomorrow, but the Sunday after this one, we have a conversation on the Google Meet site, which means that everybody shows up who wants to show up. You don't have to show your picture if you don't want. You don't have to talk, but we have a real conversation. Come join us there. It's the same email address. Grab it there. Because I swear, if I had to listen like this in a classroom to Terry, or if I had to read him only, I wouldn't understand him. I got 30 years of hours a week, one-on-one talking to Terry Deacon. And I consider that's my equivalent to the sunset arc at 16 years old, that I lucked into that with an appetite, aptitude, and opportunity to get what he's talking about is the greatest. I mean, I'm just very grateful. It's made my life radically different. If I hadn't spent that time jamming with him, the kind of jamming we try to do on Sunday, I'd be a very different critter. And one of the things about him is he never wastes time grandstanding on a high horse. He has never once talked down to me in all this time. He's a weird human being. Um, He did something last night. We were out to dinner after our meeting, and he did something completely unprecedented. He's the opposite end of the spectrum from me temperamentally. He's the most gentle, benign guy. Everybody refers to me as his bulldog. He's the opposite of me. He never pushes any of this theory with this kind of strength we did. So we were reading our fortune cookies at a Chinese restaurant, and I said, what did you get, Terry? What did you get? And he said to me, suck it. That is so out of character for him. We all laughed. I said, that is the sweetest moment. I said to the group, I said, I have spent 30 years trying to influence this guy to get him a little bit more vulgar. This was by far the most vulgar thing this total nerd has ever done. It was so sweet. He winked. And then this morning we got together for our walk. And it became a running joke. He started out by saying, you, like he was going to blame me for something. He's maybe some of it is, who knows? Anyway, thanks for being here, you guys. And I'll be back again next Saturday. We can continue on this and any topic. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Once again, I'm going to repeat it here. Come join us. At 9 o'clock there. The focus there is on how to deal with absolutists more effectively. And I will mention one last thing before I do, which is here's another technique I have employed, which is tell me how you came to your strong opinions. And what they will do is they will echo their strong opinions, or they will summarize it. Well, I did it through experience and learning. No, I want to hear you walk through your origin story. Do not tell me your story. Do not tell me what you believe again. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking how, walk me through it so I understand how you came to your strong opinions. Notice how that relates to that thing about whether the feelings came first and then the thoughts, or whether you came to your thoughts by neutral shopping and then that's how you came to your strong conclusion, which is what everybody wants to say they do. All right. See you next time. See you tomorrow. Come join us. All right. Take care, you guys.